Okay guys, thanks for coming. Thanks for the patience as well. It's been very much appreciated. We've sort of got our timings wrong a bit. First of all, just a few apologies about the space slightly. It's a bit sort of like dusty in that. I think most of us have all been informed like we're sort of just doing a project at the moment as a whole space where we're basically making a scaled down version of our Wintroom gallery, which is going to be exhibited in the South Bank this weekend. So that sort of explains a bit of the mess and stuff, so we do apologise for that. I was basically going to start off this talk by sort of just talking about the kind of origins of the show, the sort of initial ideas, how it sort of came about, and then sort of talk about the chosen artists, why they're sort of the reason for getting them together. And then moving on to like how we sort of formulated the show, how everything came together, talking about discussing the title and stuff like that, the reasoning for that. And then sort of move on to sort of individual works and how they sort of like kind of relate together, and going more in depth about what the artist's outcomes are, you know, sort of beyond just their statements of practice. And then we'll sort of have like a sort of Q&A session where we'll sort of just get into a bit of debate and stuff like that, really. So the origin story basically would have been about, and then sort of around Christmas, New Year, Amy, the director, and John, the curator, were sort of encouraging me to sort of basically develop a show for the space. They were encouraging me to sort of like just get the space and then group a show together, and they had in mind a kind of like artist-led show, you know, from the studio. So I sort of took up the offer and initially started thinking about who would sort of be good sort of bring together, what sort of had in mind. At the time I sort of had in mind a kind of a works on paper show maybe, because at the time I was sort of doing a lot of work on paper and a lot of print work, and a few artists I've been relating to had sort of been exploring drawing, and I was kind of interested in all those things surrounding the sort of new discourses of drawing and stuff like that, things like the German drawing and stuff like that. And so that was kind of my thinking at the time, and as well the space itself. Looking back on it a bit, we've never quite seen a full-on sort of works on wall kind of show. It's always been very much about relating to the space. I say always. I mean there have been exceptional things, but I wanted to see something where we could sort of use the space perhaps in that on-the-wall sense, kind of really. So yeah, it's all sort of was originated around that really. So very sort of simplistic, you know. Let's see what the potentials are of works on wall in this space. So then it comes down to the artists. So the first artist I sort of thought of was Claire Barrett, and I went to art school with Claire. And the reason I selected her was because at the time, while at art school, our work always had that kind of, it had quite a nice, I know it's an overused word, but we had this kind of nice dialogue going on between us. She was doing these very large scale kind of ink drawings. She'd kind of come out of just exploring kind of landscape, very simplistically, but just exploring how landscape kind of relates to the plane of the actual paper, you know, so coming very sort of abstract, and she went very deeply into ideas regarding like sublime and stuff like that. And so she had these like really kind of like epic, strong works. They were very, very good, and we always we had big discussions surrounding those kind of ideas, and our work just seemed to relate quite well. I was working on prints and stuff like that. And I think, I don't know, we were just on that level in terms of our approach. I feel that kind of like how we reflected about our work, how we produced our work, our kind of ethics were all kind of sort of similar. So and as well, that's where I kind of thought, going back to the works on paper thing, that was kind of the initial start. So I was like, so we both sort of worked on paper, what could we sort of expand out maybe? And so that kind of brings in the other artist, Miles, whose work's behind us at the moment. It's being glared out at the moment.
Yeah,
we haven't got the blocks on. But yeah, he essentially explored, his approach was slightly different, but we always kind of liked that kind of complement, how we sort of complemented each other. He was very he was at art school as well with me, and we would always have like the most like intense like debate, like conversations just about very wide issues of things like philosophy and art and how they sort of relate. And his work took a sort of film approach, and I mean what I quite liked was that how that kind of very heavy conceptual element was starting to come in with this, from me and Claire, this very much more process based. So that was the kind of first stitch, that was the first kind of expansion out. How could we perhaps get this going a bit? How else can we read art? How else can we approach art? So I thought these kind of paper works, Virgin on Abstract kind of works with the film work relating to like ideas of philosophy would be quite a nice mix. Because we never quite explicitly got to work together before. So it kind of seemed like a very good opportunity that we'd been given. So it was all sort of fairly intuitive, Usually. So yeah, but so then as well, I mean, like a kind of a little bit of time went by, and was thinking about when I started thinking about the show more. We were sort of producing work and stuff at the time, and started to sort of sink in. We had to sort of put on a show here at the space, and was thinking about previous shows that we'd had on and stuff like that. 3 people filling up this space. It could be particularly the kind of work we was doing. It kind of needed that. It felt like it kind of needed that element. Unfortunately, it just like most good things, it just sort of came along at the right time. These two things kind of meet. The circumstances are very good, and that was pretty much what Dave was doing with his work. He'd previously done these like very big. David's a studio member here, so and I used to share a space with him, but not anymore. His work's too big. And
you can't share a studio space with Dave.
Yeah, you can't share a space with Dave now. It's too big. Yeah. Anyway, he if you haven't seen his work previously, he was doing these about sort of like last year. He was doing these big sort of drip paintings, sort of very like macho, materialistic kind of stuff. Very kind of like the limit of painting, I guess, maybe. And initially I never quite felt. I always felt Dave's work was quite problematic. I always felt like I never could quite relate to it. I never quite understood really. Why? Almost felt like why is he producing this stuff? I don't quite get it. Because it seems too. That's it. This seems too. What's the word? Sort of one way, maybe. It's very dead. Yeah, very dead end.
It's about the process.
Exactly, it's very about.
Finished,
yeah, and you got all those very like macho words coming out, like, oh yeah, it's all about the paint and the material and all that kind of stuff.
But actually, interesting in his head, that's not what goes on, and that's where it led to.
Well, this is it. Yeah. So this kind of expanded out from these paintings, and so he moved on from these drip paintings, these massive drip paintings. They were like huge, just all these big pours of paint going down these boards. And he moved away and started doing these drawings, which I actually started to find really interesting. They were ink on paper, fortunately enough, and they're about these kind of creating these kind of networks which kind of lose their root and become quite vague in where they sort of originate from. So if you see his works, they're kind of these big kind of like relational forms, which eventually lose out their root. You can't quite see where they started, where they end. There's kind of this big vagueness between all that, and so I started, and I was working with him at the time, and a lot of the work I was doing, making at the time, he was making. Sorry, a lot of the work I was making for the show at the time, he was making these, and it just seemed very natural to be like, well, this is the kind of element we sort of need in the show. So that kind of goes through the reasoning of all those artists. Then why we chose. Everyone kind of just seemed to intuitively link sort of at the right time, at the right sort of, everything just seemed quite nice and natural, basically. So things sort of go on to the forming of the show. So we obviously sort of all just met up and started to sort of, have these like nice crits together about, potential concepts for the show, what's the kind of themes, what's the ideas, you know, what could the title be for the show, what are we doing, why, what's the point. And so we all came together, and I think this is where we started to actually expand on these simplistic ideas of what I was saying about just simply working on paper, simply exploring processes and simply exploring concepts, you know, how we view concepts, how we view processes. I think this is where it starts to kind of slightly expand a bit, which is kind of cool. And we actually all sort of came together to sort of discuss where our work could then go for the exhibition. And rather than our work sort of coming more linked together, it almost seems like it kind of separated out a bit from this. It kind of, more variety began to sort of get created, I think. And
Can I just ask, how far in advance was that? And when did you first get together to decide?
this was about, this is a few months before, it was about 3 months maybe for the show. So as I said earlier, like we got like clarification of the space in sort of, I think it was about January, February time. So sort of from March we was already thinking about it, and then April was April was the kind of you know, on it time. You know,
Yeah.
right, everything's forming together. On it time, is that a word?
Yeah,
Whatever, you
But
know.
you were.
Yeah.